Only 1 week away from the start of a new presidential administration. The big story this morning, much like we anticipated, Vice President Mike Pence said he will not be invoking the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office. And in a letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Pence wrote, "I do not believe that such a course of action is in the best interest of our nation or consistent with our Constitution." The VP went on to say using the 25th Amendment now would set a terrible precedent because, as it is written, invoking the 25th applies to cases of presidential incapacity or disability. He's also hoping that the country can focus rather on a peaceful transfer of power. So what happens now? Well, since Vice President Pence is not invoking the 25th Amendment, Speaker Pelosi says the chamber will vote today to impeach President Trump for the second time. No U.S. president has ever been impeached twice. Democrats say that they have enough votes to charge the president with high crimes and misdemeanors. And right now, a handful of Republican lawmakers, including House GOP leader Liz Cheney, plan to vote with Democrats to impeach President Trump. And speaking of President Trump, he has shown no remorse whatsoever what happened a week ago today at the Capitol. He's also calling the second impeachment a continuation of the biggest witch hunt against a sitting president ever.
Yeah, interesting comments. Thanks a lot for that. Gio?